Please be seated. I'm surprised to see so few people here. We've called this special session of the Colorado Supreme Court for the investiture, for the investiture of our newest colleague, Carlos A. Samour. Of course, was the Chief Judge in the 18th Judicial District. Now he's going to fill the vacancy created by the retirement of our former Chief, Nancy E. Rice. I'm the new Chief Justice, Ben Coates, and let me say I'm delighted that you've all come to share in this taking of the oath to welcome Carlos onto our court. Before I get too far along on all that, though, and I'll solicit questions from the audience later. Let me introduce the members of my bench. For those of you that aren't lawyers, you may not know this, but we follow the tradition for a multi-judge court like ours, and so we always sit on the basis of seniority. Chief sits in the middle. Right of the chief is senior to left, and closer to the chief is senior to further away. So, in order of seniority, my colleagues, Monica Marquez, Brian Boatwright, Will Hood, Gabriel, and Melissa Hart. And we have one open seat for the new member when he comes. I'd also like to take note of the large number of dignitaries that we have here today. In particular, we're very pleased to have the Governor Hickenlooper, who's going to present the new justice to the court. But let me also take special note of a few of my former colleagues and former members of the court. Actually, I was looking on the TV screen to make sure who we had here, and we have three former Chief Justices here. Chief Justice Joe Quinn, Chief Justice Mike Bender, and Chief Justice Nancy Rice, who's come. And then we also have other former members of our court. We have Becky Corliss and Alex Martinez, and and we're pointing. And our latest lost colleague, who's now sitting on the federal bench on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, Allison Ide.
Greg Hobbs.
And did I see Greg? Oh, and excuse me, Greg Hobbs.
And Becky Corliss.
Yeah, I said Becky. You should always read scripts, but I have a bunch of hand interlineated notes based on what we were seeing on the TV screen. So let me just say, were I to try to individually announce the name of everybody who would qualify, I think, as a dignitary or honored guest here, I think I'd be introducing most of the chamber. So I'm not going to do that, but I don't want anybody to fail to understand the sort of breadth and depth of the dignitaries who've come here today, so I'm going to try to point out as best I can the folks who've come here, or the groups of folks who've come here to celebrate with our new Justice Samour. Let me recognize particularly the presence of Chief Justice Loeb of the Colorado Court of Appeals, who's here. And I will just say, rather than following tradition here, that virtually his entire court is here. So just about all the members of the Court of Appeals. We have, I know, at least 15 chief judges from the various districts around the state have come to support Justice Samour, other judicial officers. We have a number of our friends from the federal bench have come over. Well, I'm not going to list them all, but we have numerous elected officials, agency heads, nominating commissioners. I see a number of law enforcement officers, past and present officers of the bar, and we should have at least one law school dean here, all to all to celebrate with Justice Samour. Finally, I'd like to give a special welcome to Justice Samour's family members. His parents sitting at the table with him, Carlos Samour Sr., and Carlos's mother, Lilium, are at the table with him. Carlos tells me he has a large contingent of family members sitting out in the audience, but he told me he would, or assured me, that he would introduce all of his family members himself, so I'll leave that to him. Once again, then, just a hearty welcome to everybody. We appreciate very much you coming to lend support to this auspicious occasion. And with that, let's proceed to the presentation of Justice Samour. Governor Hickenlooper, if you'd like to, do we have a podium for you? Speak from the podium here on my right. We'd all be delighted to hear your remarks.
I would never question the Chief Justice, but not everyone's delighted to hear the governor's remarks. Thank you all. Thank you, Chief Justice Coates. And let me say that you wear the mantle well. This is your second month of being Chief Justice, and Justice Marquez, Justice Boatwright, Justice Hood, Justice Gabriel, Justice Hart. When you appoint Supreme Court justices, it's unfair to say, but honest to say that your most recent appointment is always slightly closer to your heart than the others, but each of you have been very close to my heart at one point. I could not be more honored to be here today for the swearing in, I think, for one of the most qualified people ever to be nominated. And I think if you the briefest glance at his resume, the briefest of conversations, and you're hit over the head with his striking intellect, you don't even have to go that far. You can just check out the awards he's won for being one of the best judges in the state. In many ways, he's impossible to categorize. Is he a liberal or is he a conservative? Too liberal or too conservative? Is he a visionary with a sweep of the role and effects of law? Or is he a meticulous and detail-oriented student of case law and precedent? I think he is all these things. As we were just discussing, I think he is a man for all seasons. But that's not why he's here today. He's here and will be here for some years to come because, as one person said, the kind of law a candidate practiced is not nearly as important as the kind of person that the practice produced. And I think he is, and this is not myself alone, but the verdict of many, many people. We saw this in the recommendations on his behalf. He's one of the finest people you could ever meet, a good person with a big heart and a true understanding of the word justice. He's known not only for his fairness, but for his dogged determination and his pure, unadulterated love of the law. Justice Samour has been shaped by his extraordinary personal story, fleeing with his family from El Salvador after his home was riddled with bullets and his family received death threats, all because his father chose to faithfully apply the law. They embarked on a uniquely American 5-day journey to Colorado, where upon arriving they slept in his aunt's basement on the floor. No English, no money, the kind of culture shock that can easily and has clearly altered the rest of the arc of his life. Justice Samour chose to embrace this experience, own it, and work hard to give others the same chance at opportunity and rehabilitation by fairly applying the law. He was challenged by that ultimate test of the Aurora shooting case, which few ever experienced and in which he shined, because he's a good listener and treats every person with respect. He treats everyone how they deserve and how they would like to be treated. As the editor of the Aurora Sentinel, Dave Perry, said in describing Justice Samour's handling of the trial, It was like having Carl Sagan patiently explain an amazing experiment unfolding at the same time he was running it. He puts people at ease with his wicked sense of humor. He did that to us during the interview process. His favorite movie, by the way, is My Cousin Vinny. But he has assured us that that will not inform his judicial perspective. Indeed, when we talked, he quoted Reverend Martin Luther King, Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, as well. By all accounts, his door is never shut to a colleague. He gives advice freely, and more important, he seeks it. Justice Samour could have been a successful partner and trial lawyer, but his true calling has always been public service. Along the way, he has also become a brilliant legal scholar. Justice Samour's story is one that I think in many ways couldn't have happened anywhere else. He rose to prominence through hard work and challenges that most of us couldn't imagine, let alone experience. And despite, or perhaps because of those challenges, he is not only fair, but overflows with integrity. I can't think of anyone else who should be one of the final voices on whether we have been just to the people of Colorado. He inspires me, he inspired everyone who was in my office interviewing him, and I think we will be hearing from him and reading his word for many, many years to come. Congratulations, best of luck, although certainly you don't need it. We're so glad you're here.
Well, at this point in the program, we usually hear a few remarks from someone that the appointee has chosen to make those remarks himself. Justice Samour has asked a former friend, or actually a longtime friend and mentor of his from his days back at Holland and Hart, to speak on his behalf, Mr. Peter Houtsma. And if Mr. Houtsma would come up, you can speak. And yes, I was going to say, speak from that podium and feel free to face the audience here.
Only a timer, Your Honor.
I'm not sure that we have the red light fixed.
Yeah, I know. May it please the court, and good afternoon. Although everybody knows the governor, many people in the room I don't think know me. My name is Peter Houtsma. I spent my entire career of about 40 years at the law firm of Holland and Hart in Denver. And it was in 1991, when I was there, that I met Carlos Armando Samour, Jr., who I will refer to during the course of my remarks, with no disrespect in these chambers, primarily as Carlos. I appear here today as a representative of the hundreds of people who are in this room today, his friends, his colleagues, the dignitaries in the state, and particularly his family. When Carlos asked me to provide a few remarks, I said, "Oh, Carlos, I have so much material on you. How much time do I have?" I told him that this was my opportunity for a roast. Carlos told me no. He quashed that. He said, "This is a special session of the Colorado Supreme Court, so no roast." So we compromised on a casserole. A little spice, but not too much. He also told me that the governor would precede me, and I had previously reviewed the governor's remarks for the investitures of Justice Hart, and Justice Gabriel. So I knew that the governor would do a good job in terms of kind of highlighting those areas. So what was I left with? Well, I basically was left with talking about Carlos the person. What makes Carlos who he is, what brought him to this stage of his life, why he was appointed. And Justice Gabriel, I would tell you that if you're looking for a backup singer for one of your gigs, Carlos is not your man. So I'll give you some personal insights, because I think that in many cases, people who work with the lawyers in the legal profession see one side of them. The family members see another side of them, and very rarely do you kind of get to see both sides in a person. I've been privileged enough, I think, to see both sides of Carlos. I've seen Carlos in his family. I've seen Carlos in connection with functions at his family, and I've seen Carlos throughout his career from 1991 to the present. But before I get to Carlos, I would like to take 1 minute with the court's indulgence to make a slight detour. And that's a detour directed to the governor. The governor is coming up to the end of his term, 8 years. And the governor reminded me as we were sitting here today that in connection with the 7 now justices of the Colorado Supreme Court, he's appointed 5 of them. We have a system in Colorado where all of the judges in the state are appointed on the basis of merit. They all come up through nominating commissions. All those nominating commission members, either solely or together with the Colorado Attorney General and the Chief Justice of the Colorado Supreme Court, are appointed by the governor. So in connection with all of the 22 judicial districts, plus the nominating commission for the Colorado Supreme Court and the Colorado Court of Appeals, the governor has appointed every single member of those commissions. Those commissions are the ones who do the vetting. They're the ones who do the interviews. They're the ones who kind of bring the candidates to the attention of the governor. And the governor and his staff do a very diligent job in terms of screening them and making the appointments. And as a result of that, 70% of the Colorado Supreme Court has been appointed by Governor Hickenlooper. Not only that, but of the members of the Colorado Court of Appeals, 40% of the sitting judges of the Colorado Court of Appeals will have been appointed by the governor. Go down another level to the district court level, and fully 40% of the approximately 178 district court judges were appointed by the governor. And I couldn't find any statistics on the county court judges, but I guarantee that 40% of the sitting county court justices are appointed by him. All those people are appointed not on the basis of political affiliation, not on the basis of any kind of ideological bent, not on the basis of any litmus test. They're all based upon the merit system that we have in Colorado at this time. And so I, on behalf of myself and maybe everybody else here, would simply like to thank the governor, because the legacy that you have left the state of Colorado in connection with your 8 years here is a tremendous legacy. The bench in Colorado is one of the best in the nation. And regardless of what you do from this point forward in your career, the legacy will last, and will last for many, many years. Thank you, Governor. Well, a sterling example of that legacy is Carlos. And in order to know Carlos, you basically just have to know 2 things. 1, his love of family, and 2, his love of the law. And I'm going to fill in, I think, some of the details that the governor touched upon in his speech. You heard about the fact that Carlos and his family came to the United States from El Salvador when he was 13. He came with all of his siblings, who at the time aged from 14, Jake, his older brother, all the way to Louis. And all of his siblings are here today. Louis, who was 7 months old at the time they left. A little bit more detail in terms of Mr. and Mrs. Samour had just come back to the country from a trip out of state. And Mr. Samour was advised that he was number one on a death squad list. There was tremendous political and civil unrest in El Salvador at the time. And it turned out that the number 2 person and the number 3 person on the list were already gone. So when he came home that night, he and his wife, Lillian, had a long prayerful night in terms of what are they going to do? They had lived their entire life down there. They had established a home. He was a very successful lawyer down there. But the immediacy of the situation was upon him. And after a prayerful night, they determined they had no alternative but to leave, because to stay in El Salvador at that time was simply a death warrant. So, without telling the kids what was going on, they told them, pack up things that you can in a van, and we're leaving the next day. And they knew they had to get out of the country the next day. So 14 people got into a van with what they could pack themselves, and they headed up north. But first they had to stop in order to get papers to leave the country and enter the United States. Well, there was a problem with that. But they found a gentleman who was a lawyer that Carlos Sr. knew, and he kind of got him through the bureaucracy, and he got him the papers to at least get out of San Salvador. They continued on their journey. Without him, they could not have gotten out of the country for another couple of days or weeks. That was miraculous in and of itself. So they get up to the border of Guatemala, and the border agents in Guatemala say, you don't have the necessary papers to get out of the country and enter into Guatemala. Well, it turns out that the same lawyer who saw him down in El Salvador was in a car next to them. And he said, whatever they need, I have the papers to get them out. Apparently they needed a stamp. So he stamped it, and they continued on their way. Again, just coincidence or what? They traveled up and eventually reached the United States, eventually reached Lillian's sister's house in Colorado. And as the governor said, they slept on the floor in the basement. Now, Carlos says that this was in August of 1979. He had just gotten out of school down in El Salvador, so he was ready for like a 3-month vacation. Well, school started like a week or two after he got to the United States. He thought maybe you would have a little bit of a time to prepare, because at the time, he didn't speak English, but he started school at Columbine within the first couple of weeks. Got to school, didn't speak English, was told when he got to school, you got to fill out an index card. Fill out your name, fill out your address, fill out your phone number. Well, Carlos knew his name, but he had no idea what to put down in terms of the address. He had no idea what to put down in terms of the phone number. So one of his colleagues who spoke Spanish told him what needed to be done and helped him. And Carlos remembered that in terms of kind of a random act of kindness, which he's carried forward since then. First couple of weeks were very difficult, and there was no way to really keep up when you can't speak the language. So he and a number of his siblings transferred out of Columbine and the normal schools into ESL schools, English as a Second Language school. And that resulted in a much longer commute. But for the next year, he learned English, was able to go back to the regular school system. A number of people have commented, however, that it probably would have been a good idea for Carlos to remain in English as a second language school so that he could improve his accent. Carlos has a retort for everything, so when people talk about his accent, he simply indicates that it's as a result of time that he spent in Brooklyn. When the family came back, all went to school. They're all very successful, and they all became very successful students. They all became very successful kind of in their own right. The plan, however, was never to stay in Colorado. The plan was to hopefully go back to El Salvador at some point. But the problem was the political upheaval. The situation in the country was simply not conducive to that. So they kept renewing their 3-month visa again and again and again and again. Maybe some of the more senior people in the room will remember that in El Salvador at the time, there were murders. There was a murder of Archbishop Romero down there, who is now going to be canonized as a saint, and who, by the way, married Mr. and Mrs. Samour. And there were murders in terms of some marrying old nuns and the like. So it just never worked out. So after kind of continuing to renew the visas for a while, they became permanent citizens, permanent residents of the United States. And eventually in 1987, Carlos became a United States citizen. And thereafter, all of his other family members did too. You may kind of be wondering, since they left El Salvador with kind of nothing other than what was in the van, what they were doing in terms of trying to earn a living. Well, Carlos was working as he was going to school. He was a dishwasher. He was a janitor. He worked at Winchell's Donuts, which is probably where he gets his sweet tooth. He worked at Sears for 6 years. And during the course of that time and thereafter, anybody in the room who knows him, he just connects with all strata of people. And I think it goes back to the people that he worked with in those jobs during that period of time. He just has a way of connecting with almost everyone. And Carlos Sr., when he came here, he was a very prominent lawyer down in El Salvador, but he could not adapt to the situation in the United States. So what did he do? Well, he proudly drove a bus for the Jefferson County School District for the next 12 years. He did it proudly, and he did a great job. And what he taught his children at the time was that it's not the job that makes the individual. It's the attitude that you have toward your job that makes the individual. And I think that was passed down to Carlos in connection with kind of whatever he's done since that time. Let me talk a little bit about the Samour family. The Samour family, you've heard about the 12 kids, the mother and the father. Well, in addition to that, there are 32 grandchildren. There's 6 great-grandchildren. Maybe one of them is in the court today, quiet. But what is so remarkable is that they get together most every Sunday at Carlos's mother and father's house. The house has never grown much bigger, but what really has grown bigger is the table that they sit down and eat at. And this table is now from about this side of the room here over to where the Samours are seated. It used to be a big square table. Now it's just a huge long table. It's like a banquet table. And when they come over for Sunday dinner, and there's 30 or 40 or 50 people over there, every Sunday, In addition to people who drop in during the course of the week, they sit and they talk, and they talk, and they talk. And they have discussions about politics, sports, what's going on in the family, and they interact. And Carlos gets involved in that, and it's a multi-generational conversation that takes place. There are various views, differing views within the family on various subjects. But the one thing I noted in connection with being at their house is kind of the respect that they show for differing opinions. Carlos trying to understand how somebody else feels the way they do as a result of maybe some different perception. And so you come away from that with just a remarkable kind of feeling of unity and bonding of kind of what goes on in the family. One other thing, though, that goes on in the family is a lot of joking and teasing and comedy. And people who know Carlos know about his comedy. And so I asked, where does Carlos get his comedic sense? Well, they tell me that it's from his father. And so I'm not going to dwell a lot about these things because I have too many stories, but you got to know two things. One, in Carlos's application to be a justice of the Colorado Supreme Court, he didn't spare the members of the nominating commission. One of the questions was, what do you do for leisure activity? He said, well, I watch sporting events. I watch the World Cup. I like the Broncos. He says, I watch the Broncos. But then, to quote Carlos, it was much more fun to cheer for them when John Elway and Peyton Manning were at the helm. I have one other. In 1994, I became managing partner of Holland & Hart. So I kind of had to deal with Carlos in his capacity as, and this is his term, the non-managing, non-partner of Holland & Hart. So one of the things that Carlos did when he was the non-managing, non-partner of Holland & Hart, he was on the associates committee. And those in the audience who have been at big firms know kind of associate committees. The associates always have to have their committee. And the associates are always worried about how much are we going to get paid? How much do we have to work? What kind of feedback are we going to get? What kind of responsibility can we get? And those things that kind of go to the associates committee. So Carlos was elected only 3 years into his term at Holland & Hart as a member of the associates committee. So he goes, and every once in a while when the chair is not there, Carlos has a responsibility for preparing the minutes of the meeting. Well, Carlos did this for some time, and then Carlos would not only distribute the minutes to the associates or the members of the associate committee, but he would distribute them to everyone in the firm, like the 300 or 400 lawyers that we had at the time. I couldn't find those. I couldn't find any minutes. So I asked Joe Halpern to search his archives. He's the archivist at Holland & Hart. I said, find me a copy of some of the minutes that Carlos prepared. And Joe failed, but Joe found somebody else who was able to retrieve a copy. And this is only 2 pages of like 5 pages of Carlos's minutes. So here's a little bit of the background. The chair is not there, but a lady that is there, Liz Scher. Liz Scher today is the chair of Holland & Hart, 500 lawyers. Got more power than anybody else. She was on the committee at the time. So they asked Carlos to write up the minutes of the meeting. And this is part of what Carlos wrote and distributed to every single member of the firm. He says, the first discussion of the meeting, and perhaps the most interesting one, was started by a complaint voiced by Liz. Liz was very upset because her lunchbox included a full sandwich, even though she only ordered half a sandwich. This is apparently a problem that Liz has had to deal with for several months. Liz shared with us that she always orders half a sandwich and ends up getting a full sandwich. She said she would much rather have 2 desserts and half of a sandwich. Having developed a taste for dessert while I was in Chicago, one of the benefits of working with Maureen Witt, I knew exactly how Liz felt. We suggested forming a 1/2 sandwich subcommittee to carefully study the situation. That is indicative of Carlos Samour. Now, Carlos will tell you that he is a shy and reserved individual. You wouldn't know that by most of what he does, but I think that goes back kind of to his early days in the U.S. He now is kind of very confident, very self-confident person. I want to kind of move over just a little bit, talk about his love of the law. He developed, I think, his love of the law by watching his father in court in El Salvador. He continued that when he came to the United States, and he clerked for Judge Robert McWilliams. And as kind of the people in this room know, Judge McWilliams was a giant in the Colorado legal community. And Carlos literally followed him in terms of the public schools of Colorado. Then he went on to DU, just like Judge McWilliams. Then he went on to the bench, just like Judge McWilliams, although Judge McWilliams went through a number of benches and ended up in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So the first mentoring that Carlos got was at the knee of Judge McWilliams. Judge McWilliams later served for 40 years, both in his capacity as a judge and senior judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And Judge McWilliams probably has sent out into the legal community in Colorado more talented lawyers, I think, than any other judge ever did or maybe ever will. But Carlos is one of the products of Judge McWilliams. Came to Holland Hart in 1991. And Carlos immediately wanted as much responsibility as he could. He had learned kind of the traits of analysis and brief writing at the knee of Judge McWilliams, but he wanted to get into court. And one of the only kind of big cases that we had that was going to get him into court at the time were what we refer to as the AIDS cases. So we represented a number of individuals, not class actions, but individuals who had become infected with the HIV virus as a result of a blood transfusion or plasma transfusion. And we were some of the first cases in the nation who brought claims against, for example, the Red Cross or Bell Bond fees. Those cases were controversial. Those cases were controversial because associates didn't really want to work on them. Associates didn't want to work on them because, number one, all of your time was going to be gobbled up. You were going to be a one-case person. And so, your future rose or fell on the basis of those cases. Those cases were also ones where the defendant said, we're not settling. You take it to trial. If we lose, we'll take it up on appeal. You're never going to collect anything from us. So they were long lead times. They were also long in terms of simply getting the cases to trial at a time when we had clients who were basically dying of AIDS. Plus there was, you may find this hard to believe, there were some politics involved in terms of whether or not people within the firm thought those were appropriate cases to take. But Carlos, to his credit, said, those are the cases that I want to work on. Those are the cases, he worked on a lot of cases, but those are the ones that he primarily worked on while he was at Holland and Hart. He went to trial. He went to trial in Chicago on one of those for 6 or 7 weeks with Maureen Witt and tried that case. But he really, I think, during that period of time, developed a love of the law. He went from there to the DA's office. And the reason he did is basically because he wanted to change directions. He wanted to go into public service. So he spent the next 10 years learning kind of his trade, primarily by himself, but also through Bill Ritter and Mitch Morrissey, who were the DAs at the time. Had something like 70 felony trials. Was involved in matters with the family court, with the family unit, with the drug court, with the cold cases where basically he was looking after people who really did need kind of the help of a sympathetic prosecutor. And that's again kind of been, what Carlos has been about. He was described by Judge Morris Hoffman. I don't know whether the judge is here today. Okay. He was described by Judge Hoffman in the letter to the nominating committee as, and I quote, "the finest prosecutor ever to appear before me in all of my 27 years on the bench." He was described by his colleagues at the DA's office as the hardest working person there, working 18, 19 hours a day on his cases. But his true calling, I think, he always wanted to be a district court judge. He always wanted to be a judge. And he was appointed by Bill Owens to the to the 18th Judicial District and became a judge there. And everybody knows about the Aurora Theater shooting case that he handled. A landmark case, and I think the most high-profile case in Colorado for a period of maybe 15 or 20 years. You got to go all the way back to Judge Mach in the Oklahoma City bombing case to find a more high-profile case. That case was not originally signed to Carlos's courtroom. Chief Judge Sylvester originally had the case. Chief Judge Sylvester, once he knew that it was going to trial and was a death penalty case, said, "I'm sorry, I just don't have time to handle it." So he went to Carlos and said, "Carlos, will you take the case?" Carlos thought about it for a while and said, "I'm up for another challenge." And he took the case. And basically it occupied a substantial part of his time for the next 3 years. It's a case that anyone would just have a hard time getting their hands around. It involved not only what went on in the courtroom, but it involved, a televised trial. So not only did he have to deal with people in the courtroom, but I went out there on occasion, and you'd go to the Arapahoe County Courthouse, and for, like 500 yards, you would just see the tents of the news people, more so at the beginning, more so at the end, but covered completely. So Carlos, and we have a lot of members of people from Arapahoe County who worked on that case. People in law enforcement, people in communications, people in the clerk's office. Carlos had to hire additional law clerks, all kind of who teamed with him together to produce the result that it did. He handled the case masterfully. He had no playbook to look at. It was never a kind of a case that he could even go to somebody and say, "How do I do this?" So just another challenge by Carlos. And at the end of it, Governor, you stole a little bit of my material from Dave Perry in connection with the final line of his article. But let me read you kind of what happened, what he said before that. Because the importance of that case in terms of the legal community, I think, is what it did in terms of the perception of the citizens of Colorado. They got to see justice in action. And it was primarily because of Carlos's manner, control in the courtroom, the respect that he showed both sides in terms of just a grueling, grueling trial. So, before what the governor said, this is what Dave Perry said. He said, "Judge Samour handled the increasingly complicated trial and legal questions with a degree of expedition that was inspiring. Motions never languished. Neither the defense nor the prosecution were ever punished or patronized by Samour's rulings and admonitions. The respect he accorded both sides of large and unwieldy teams of lawyers was consistent day after day, month after month. At the same time, every move in the case, especially every aspect of the trial when it began in earnest, was handled in deference to the lay public. Carlos received a number of awards, accolades as a result of his work on the trial. You go into his office or you go into his chambers today, you won't see any of that. You'll see a picture of the people who Carlos worked with, the people who he worked, the law clerks, the people in communication, some people in law enforcement, some people in the clerk's office. Because one thing that Carlos doesn't have is Carlos doesn't have an ego. Carlos is truly a team player. And the members of the court, I think you're just going to be in for a great time with Carlos. Let me end again with the last sentence of a letter that Judge Hoffman wrote in support of Carlos's nomination, which sums it up better than anything I could say. I cannot imagine anyone to whom I would rather trust the sacred job of being the final arbiter of whether we have been just to the citizens we serve. And to that, I say amen. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those remarks. All right, Justice Samour, it's time for the main event. The swearing, the taking of the oath. If you will approach the podium and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Carlos A. Samour, Jr.,
I, Carlos A. Samour, Jr.,
do solemnly swear by the ever-living God
do solemnly swear by the ever-living God
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and of the state of Colorado,
and of the state of Colorado,
and will faithfully perform the duties
and will faithfully perform the duties
of the office of Justice of the Supreme Court of Colorado,
of the office of Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Colorado,
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now for the ceremonial robing of the new justice. Justice Samour's asked that his parents help him with the robe. I would have thought you'd figured out how to do this.
I'm working on it.
All right, and now also by a long tradition, I'm going to ask Justice Hart, who, by the way, most recently occupied that seat down on the far end at the left, to escort Justice Samour up to his seat on the bench. I know that's a long walk along there, but
All the way or just?
all right. Well, Justice Samour, on behalf of myself and all of your new colleagues, congratulations, welcome, and now you get a chance to make some remarks on your own behalf.
Thank you. You know, I wore a robe on the district court bench too, but this one feels different. As soon as I put it on, I felt this irresistible urge to say reversed. So, Court of Appeals and trial court judges, when we reverse you, just remember, it's the robes. Governor Hickenlooper, Chief Justice Coates, fellow justices and judges, other distinguished guests, and family and friends, I am so honored to have you all here today to celebrate this special day with me. I am particularly excited to be joined today by my parents, who, as you've heard, are Carlos and Lilian Samour, as well as my brothers and sisters, along with their families. As you've heard, the Magnificent 11 are my older brother Jake, actually you didn't hear, but my older brother Jake, and my younger siblings, Marjorie, Juan, Tony, Lilian, Sylvia, Anna, Helen, Jenny, Frankie, and Louie. I am also joined today by our closest cousin, Sylvia Christensen, who flew in from LA. Sylvia's husband, Jim, recently passed away, but he continues to live in our hearts and in our memories, and I know that he's here with us in spirit. I have another cousin here today, James Cafati is here. James was like a brother as we were growing up. I welcome him and his family as well. Finally, sitting with my family today is my good friend, Father Brian Mohan. I am very glad to have him with us. It is really moving to see all of you here in the courtroom this afternoon. By the way, given how full the courtroom is and the need for an overflow room, some of you might be thinking that I have a lot of supporters and people who like me. Please don't be fooled. I have maybe 20 supporters here, and I'm not sure they all like me, to be honest. The other 180 people you see here are family members. This is what a typical Samour family get-together looks like. You know, a moment ago, I took an oath, and I swore by the ever-living God. And I want to start today by thanking first and foremost the Lord God for giving me this opportunity. This doesn't happen without Him. I feel extremely blessed, and I am incredibly grateful to Him. I would like to thank Governor Hickenlooper for his remarks. Governor, your kind words are humbling and mean a lot to me. I also want to thank Mr. Houtsma for his comments. Well, some of his comments anyway. As I prepare my remarks this last week, I asked myself, how did I get here? Frankly, it's a question I've been asking myself every morning since July 2nd when I moved into my new chambers. We're all familiar with the old adage, it takes a village. Well, in my case, it took multiple villages. I first became interested in the law in my childhood in El Salvador, where my dad was a judge and later a general practice attorney. I still remember trying his suit jackets on while standing in front of the mirror. As I turned 12, my older brother and I started helping out in his office, which was adjacent to our house. When I turned 13, after much begging and pleading, he finally let me attend one of his jury trials, and I was hooked. I loved it. I knew then I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I'm going to skip ahead about a decade now in an effort to keep my comments to only 4 hours. I'm kidding, I'm only speaking for 3 hours. Actually, my comments are about 30 minutes long, but I will feed you snacks afterwards, so please bear with me. As I share my story, I think you'll realize that seemingly random events throughout my career have conspired to land me here. And I think you'll agree I could never have charted the course that led to this appointment. I will take you for a ride along the twisting road which includes 9 mile markers. The first mile marker is right after I had accepted an offer to attend CU Law School and sent in my $100 deposit. Just a couple of months before school started, a family friend, Dom Verastro, while making small talk, asked me why not DU Law School since it was closer to home. I told him the scholarship I had been offered there wasn't enough. On his own, he called his friend Professor Howard Rosenberg at DU Law, and before I knew it, Professor Rosenberg had put me in touch with the finance office where I learned about additional scholarships and grants. So, instead of attending CU Law, I ended up at DU Law. During first year at DU Law, there was a class we were required to take called Research and Writing, which was taught by former Colorado Supreme Court Chief Justice Eddie Pringle. Chief Justice Pringle had a judicial assistant named Karen, who is the second mile marker. Karen, for whatever reason, took a liking to me. Years later, she would share with me that when students turned in their papers, they threw them in the basket on her desk and treated her like she wasn't there. Although I don't remember it, according to Karen, when I turned in my papers, I greeted her and made her laugh. As the first year of law school came to an end, Karen asked me if I had plans for the summer. I had just turned 22 and I was clueless. I had not even thought about securing a summer job or internship. Karen convinced me to apply for the most junior of the 3 research assistant positions Chief Justice Pringle had. Chief Justice Pringle hired me, the third mile marker, and I had the great privilege of getting to know him and learning from him. Although by that time he moved slowly and was soft-spoken, his mind was as sharp as ever. He was feisty, had a great sense of humor, was quick-witted, and was a wonderful storyteller. I still remember hearing about his days on the Supreme Court and thinking, what a cool job that must have been. Ever since then, I've wondered what conferences among justices are like. Well, I'm about to find out next month. Now, I know it's nothing like this, but with Justice Gabriel's assistance, let me share with you what I have always pictured in my mind.
Well, what are you asking me for?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you who's on first.
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes. Now that's collegiality. As my second year of law school was winding down, I re-upped to stay another year with Chief Justice Pringle, this time as his lead RA. Karen asked me if I had applied for a judicial clerkship after graduation. No, I had not applied for a judicial clerkship. Graduation wasn't even on my radar. Not only did Karen push me to apply for a judicial clerkship, she suggested I apply to clerk at the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit with Judge Bob McWilliams. Judge McWilliams and Chief Justice Pringle were friends, and a prior RA, John Sparborough, had just accepted a clerkship with Judge McWilliams. John and Jan, his wife now, were both involved in the class and encouraged me to apply with Judge McWilliams too. I was embarrassed to ask Chief Justice Pringle for a reference letter, but Karen wasn't. Actually, Karen didn't ask, she told him. Carlos needs a reference letter from you, and you should make it a good one. He did. The letter he wrote was more than I could have asked for. I was so humbled by it. Karen wasn't done, though. She later nudged Chief Justice Pringle to do more, and he called Judge McWilliams on my behalf. After being hired by Judge McWilliams, the 4th mile marker, he shared with me that he usually hired the #1 student from CU Law and the #1 student from DU Law. I was in the top 10% of my class, but I was not ranked #1. Judge McWilliams told me he made an exception with me because Eddie called him on a Sunday to talk about me. He figured that anyone Eddie would call about on a Sunday was worth having as a law clerk. My experience as a law clerk for Judge McWilliams was invaluable. I learned so much from him, including related to how he made decisions, the importance of doing justice, writing clearly, and his perspective on life. As my remarks reflect, though, some lessons, such as being concise, I'm still working on. But hey, that's the type of life challenge that makes the journey fun. I enjoyed my clerkship with Judge McWilliams so much that at the end of it, I offered to be his permanent law clerk. Truth be told, I was also scared to go out into the legal jungle. He chuckled and told me I needed to spread my wings and learn to fly. He was right, of course. I started learning to fly at Holland and Hart, the 5th mile marker. But my path to H&H was as unconventional as the path I took to Chief Justice Pringle's RA and to be Chief Justice Pringle's RA, and the path that later led me to Judge McWilliams' law clerk. As I was about to begin my clerkship with Judge McWilliams, Jude Biggs, a partner at Holland and Hart, convinced me to interview at her firm. I had met Jude during my time as an RA because she was one of the many practicing attorneys Chief Justice Pringle relied on to grade his students' papers. I didn't really want to do commercial litigation, much less work at a big firm. I actually wanted to be in the public sector, but I reluctantly accepted Jude's invitation because I figured I shouldn't pass up an opportunity to interview with the largest firm in the region, especially since I had a student loan. My interview involved a handful of 30-minute meetings with different partners. I still remember being asked by each what kind of law I wanted to practice. Personal injury plaintiff's work, I said confidently each time. I thought it would be the type of work that would most resemble work in the public sector. I'd be representing everyday people seeking justice. Not surprisingly, each interviewer had a confused facial expression that essentially said, "Kid, you do know we don't really do personal injury plaintiff's work, right?" They somehow still offered me a job. And I somehow was inclined to reject their offer. But then out of the blue, my friend and former classmate, Rita Booker, called me. She was working at H&H and said they had authorized her to wine me and dine me to convince me to accept their offer. About a week after we went to this lavish dinner, she called me in a panic and told me she had apparently spent a lot more than she was supposed to. So she might be in a little bit of hot water. However, if I accepted the job offer, all would be forgiven. Well, I felt bad for Rita. I didn't want her to get in trouble. Besides, I knew that if I accepted the offer, I wouldn't have to do more job interviews the rest of the year. So I accepted. As it turns out, I had a rewarding experience at H&H. No, it wasn't always easy or fun. There were some growing pains, but it's an experience I have never regretted. If I had to do it all over again, knowing then what I know now, I'd still accept their offer. And guess what type of work I ended up doing almost exclusively at H&H? Yep, personal injury plaintiffs' cases. And they weren't garden variety fender bender cases either. As you've heard, I stumbled upon this incredible opportunity that allowed me to work on transfusion-transmitted AIDS cases. The hours were long, but the work was fascinating. We were representing everyday people, and we were fighting for justice, for fairness, and for what was right. What could possibly have been better for a brand new lawyer? It was at H&H that I learned how to litigate civil cases, and I learned from gifted trial attorneys like Maureen Witt, Bruce Jones, now Judge Jones on the Denver District Court, Steve Choquette, Sonny Flowers, and Dan Patterson. What a formidable education. I am especially grateful for Maureen's mentorship. While at H&H, I was also fortunate to work and befriend other phenomenal and wonderfully accomplished individuals like Betsy Phelan, Joe Halpern, John Walsh, and Brooke Jackson, now Judge Jackson on the Federal District Court. In addition, I forged lifelong friendships with Mr. Houtsma, Dave Powell, and Stephanie Welsh, all first-class individuals. When I was in my 5th year at H&H, the AIDS litigation was drawing to an end, and I remember an article Maureen had shown me a year or so earlier from the Docket, the Denver Bar Association publication. It was a profile of then Denver District Attorney Bill Ritter, who has been a champion in my corner throughout my career, but couldn't be here today because he's out of the country. The article talked about Bill's ethics, integrity, and moral core. I thought to myself, there is a leader I like to work for and learn from. So I applied for a job in his office, and I was fortunate to receive an offer which I accepted, the 6-mile marker. Of course, I had to take a big pay cut. But what I was most disappointed about is that I had to start from the bottom as a county court deputy. As it turned out, that actually was a good thing in the long run because I was assigned to Judge Harrell's courtroom in county court. and he is a mentor extraordinaire. He wanted to teach the attorneys in his courtroom and help them improve. And without a doubt, he made me a better lawyer. At that time, the DA's office had 8 prosecutors assigned to county court, 2 per courtroom. As the senior deputy in county court, I remember trying to convince Bill that we needed 9 deputies so that the senior deputy, that would have been me, could be a supervisor type. Eventually, I got promoted to juvenile court and I dropped the subject. A month into my stint in juvenile court, Bill called me down to his office. When I arrived, I could tell he was up to something. He said, "Carlos, I've got good news and I've got bad news. I now agree with you and your idea about a 9th deputy in county court, and I have the budget to do it. The bad news is I'm making you the 9th deputy, so I'm regressing you to county court." Unable to contain his laughter, he showed me a sign he had made: "A stitch in time saves 9." In all fairness, I deserved that. I gave Bill and his trusted and savvy assistant, Chuck Lepley, much more grief than they dished out. One day, I was worried I might have overdone it. Sure enough, when I returned to the office from court, I found everything on my desk packed in a box. My stapler, paper clips, pens, pencils, notepads, picture frames, even my telephone, everything had been packed in the box that was on top of my desk. Inside the box, there was a note: "Carlos, please see me ASAP, Bill." I asked my friends if Bill was laughing when he stopped by. He wasn't laughing, they told me. He just said he really needs to see you. You can imagine how quickly my heart skipped a beat. As I was walking down the long hallway that led to Bill's office, no doubt looking pale, Bill and Chuck came out of Bill's office, pointed at me, and started laughing hysterically. Yep, they got me. After hearing these stories and the ones from Mr. Houtsma, my new colleagues might understandably be concerned about my shenanigans. I want to put them at ease that they have nothing to worry about. Having said that, this is probably a good time to share with them that I have an idea for change. I always find it's better to propose change at an event like this with 200 plus people in attendance. I was at a Rockies game last Friday night with my friend Judge Paul King, and it occurred to me that baseball players should not be the only ones who enjoy a theme song as they step up to the plate. So I was thinking that the 7 of us, when we come out on the bench, could have our own theme song. You know, something like "We Are Family," "Unwritten," "We Ain't Got Nothing Yet," "Why Must You Always Dress in Black," and my personal favorite from Snow White, "Hi Ho." I mean, there are 7 of us, and we all
I'm not
approve.
dopey. Not dopey.
We could change the lyrics so we don't say "dig, dig, dig" and instead say "read, read, read" or "write, write, write." Anyway, back to my story. After being a prosecutor for 4 years, I requested an assignment in the gang unit. I was disappointed that Bill sent me instead to the special victim unit. But once again, not getting what I wanted turned out to be great. In SVU, I worked closely with Stephanie Villafuerte, and I quickly realized that she was a masterful trial advocate. Stephanie became another wonderful mentor who taught me a lot about the law and about life. More importantly, she became a great friend, and we remain great friends today. Had Bill granted my wish to go to the gang unit, I also would have missed out on working closely with Mitch Morrissey and becoming friends with him. I was the SVU deputy assigned to the courtroom where Mitch was the chief deputy. We got to know each other and to work together in that courtroom. I learned more about cross-examining an expert in a criminal case from Mitch than any class I had taken. Later, when Mitch became the elected DA, he asked me to spearhead the cold case DNA unit. During my time in the DA's office, I was lucky to work with many other remarkable individuals, including Tim Garner, the best investigator in the state and my best friend in the DA's office, and Dr. Brian Allen, another wonderful friend and one of the smartest people I know. But I learned how to be a judge from the judges I appeared in front of in Denver. I mentioned Judge Harrell already. And in district court, I was assigned at different times to Judges Bayless, Hyatt, and Hoffman. If anyone had to pick 3 judges to do a mentorship program on how to be a district court judge, it's hard to imagine that you can do better than those 3 brilliant jurists. I should have been paying, not getting paid, for the opportunity to learn from them. I am particularly indebted to the Hyatts because Sheila Hyatt taught me in the classroom and was an outstanding professor, while Judge Hyatt taught me in the courtroom and was an outstanding judge. I also have to especially thank Judge Hoffman, who has continued to be a mentor and has supported each of my applications to fill a judicial vacancy. One time, he actually wrote a reference letter for me, even though he himself was applying for the position. If that's not the definition of friendship, I don't know what is. In October 2006, after I had been a prosecutor for just over 10 years, Governor Bill Owens appointed me to the district court bench, the 7th mile marker. I was then in the 18th Judicial District for 11 and a half years. And that experience was every bit as fulfilling as I hoped it would be. I had complex cases that involved challenging legal issues, including questions that had never been addressed. In particular, I enjoyed balancing multiple important interests as I strive to do justice. It has been the most enriching work of my career thus far. I would like to thank Anna Gerlings, my current law clerk, and my law clerk of many years. Anna was by my side during my most difficult assignments as a trial court judge. To the extent I succeeded, Anna deserves much of the credit. She is exceptional. In 2014, when Chief Judge Bill Sylvester announced his retirement in the 18th, then District Administrator Lori McCager, who takes no for an answer as well as Karen did back at DU Law, and who does splendid work, and her successor, Sean Clark, whose communication skills and thoughtfulness are unmatched, and who also does an extraordinary job, convinced me to put in for the position. I did, and I was fortunate to be selected Chief Judge by then Chief Justice Nancy Rice, the 8th mile marker. I am deeply grateful to Chief Justice Rice for believing in me and for subsequently showing me unconditional support during my tenure as Chief Judge. I am equally grateful to all my friends in the 18th, including judicial officers, administrators, probation officers, and staff, for being the absolute best teammates any Chief Judge could hope for. And I want to acknowledge my friends on the Chief Judge's Council, and especially Chief Judge Pat Murphy, who took me under his wing and is a great friend. As you know, effective July 2nd, 2018, I was appointed to the Supreme Court by Governor Hickenlooper, the 9th and final mile marker. In addition to many of the individuals I have already mentioned, including Bill Ritter and Dave Powell, there were other people who supported me during my application for this appointment, whether by writing letters, making phone calls, or simply offering encouragement or support. Unfortunately, I can only think a handful of them here. I am deeply grateful to Mindy Macias, whose support is second to none, and whose friendship I treasure. Steve Alonzi, who is a true and uber-loyal friend. Rob McCollum, Steve Stedman, and Jennifer Mendoza, who have always been there for me. Doug Friednash, whose generosity and kindness I can never repay. Stanton Dodge, for whom I have the utmost respect. Justices Corliss and Martinez, and Judges Fox and Harrell, whose encouragement and advice were invaluable. Jackie Gesno and Julie Trent, who wrote thoughtful letters. And Mark Tilden, my best friend in law school and one of the most faithful souls you'll ever meet. I am also appreciative of the State Nominating Commission, and I want to give props to Governor Hickenlooper for being a cool governor, for believing in me, and for trusting me with the daunting responsibilities inherent in this prestigious position. Governor, I am truly humbled and overwhelmed by this appointment. I feel extremely honored, and I am deeply grateful. By the way, I'm glad the governor mentioned at the beginning that I'm from El Salvador. People usually hear my accent and immediately think I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm kidding, of course. People usually think I'm from Minnesota. Well, that's the story of how I got here. Without all of you, my life would have turned out differently. Without Verastro and Rosenberg, I don't attend DU Law. And without attending DU Law, I don't meet Karen. And without meeting Karen, I don't get to know Chief Justice Pringle. And without Chief Justice Pringle, I don't clerk for Judge McWilliams or work at Holland and Hart. And without H&H, I don't work at the Denver DA's office. And without working at the Denver DA's office and appearing in front of all the great judges I mentioned, I do not become a district court judge in 2006, and I'm not sitting on this chair right now. At each juncture, there was a village of dedicated friends and colleagues. My family and personal friends were involved in each village too, and played a vital role at every point. I want to acknowledge and thank Erica Keene. Although Erica and I are no longer together, we've remained friends. I know that she continually roots for me, and I sincerely appreciate her support. Our relationship and experiences helped shape who I am today, and for that, I will always be grateful. I'm also happy that her parents, Carl and Rita, who still treat me like a son, are here today, along with other family members. Most importantly, I want to thank and acknowledge my parents, as well as my siblings and their families. Without their unwavering love and support, I wouldn't be here today. I am incredibly fortunate to have an amazing family. My brothers and sisters are all super special and truly beautiful human beings. There's not a single one that I don't look forward to seeing or spending time with. It's like being gifted 11 best friends for life, even though I did nothing to deserve it. And my parents. What more can I say about my parents? They are modern-day superheroes. Superman and Wonder Woman have nothing on them. When we fled El Salvador, my parents lost much of their savings and most of their possessions. So later, they couldn't buy me a car, and they couldn't buy me a computer or a laptop. They couldn't pay for college, and they couldn't pay for law school. But they gave me much more valuable gifts. They taught me about faith. They instilled in me morals, values, and a tireless work ethic. And they encouraged me to dream big. My parents used to have a saying when I was little, "Dreaming is free, so dream big," they would tell me. And they repeatedly told me that I could do anything I wanted, anything, so I should dream big. Well, they were persuasive because I bought it. And I can't think of a better gift they could have given me. Now, while I dreamt big, I never could have imagined the winding road that led me here. You know, as I reflect on that road, I am reminded of the lucky breaks that inevitably accompany the exploits of the cartoon character known as Mr. Magoo. Although he is completely oblivious to the dangers around him, through uncanny streaks of luck, things just seem to work out. That's sort of how my life has been at times, except that it hasn't been uncanny streaks of luck that have saved me time and again. It hasn't been coincidence or serendipity. No, what comes to mind is the old saying that God works in mysterious ways, and he has worked through you. It's been you, my family, friends, and supporters who have been there for me at every turn. You've been there every step of the way to guide me, to mentor me, to encourage me, to help me up when I got knocked down, to keep me grounded when I was on cloud nine, to give me a good hockey check when I got off track, to offer me loads of patience, and to support me and love me without regard to whether I deserved it. So you see, this is really not a celebration about me. It's a celebration about you. When I think about how I got here, what jumps out isn't what I've done or what I've accomplished. It's what you've done for me. Unfortunately, there's no way I can ever properly thank you for it. Let's look at the most obvious example, my parents. As you heard, when we fled El Salvador, my father had a thriving law practice. He was 48 and in the prime of his career. Almost overnight, he went from being a successful lawyer to being a school bus driver. And my mom, who had enjoyed luxuries such as having a nanny, had to take on many more responsibilities in raising 12 kids. They left the good life they enjoyed behind to protect my siblings and me. And they arrived here with almost nothing and had to quickly adapt to a new way of life, a new language, and a new culture. What's more, neither of them ever complained, not once. How can I even dream of finding a way to properly thank them for essentially giving up their lives for me? This is obviously not a new realization for me. It's something I've been well aware of for quite some time. And what I've done throughout my life is to make sure that their incredible sacrifices are not wasted. Whether in college, law school, as an attorney, or as a judicial officer, that is something I've been cognizant of, making sure that I don't take what they did for me for granted, making sure their sacrifices count, making sure I don't squander the opportunities they made possible for me. And that's the same promise I make the rest of you today. I will do my best to make your support count. And I can't think of a better place to make it count than here, with my 6 new wonderful colleagues and friends as we work together to do justice. I'll give you the same quote that I gave the governor in the nominating commission. Martin Luther King Jr. said that every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Although I have appropriately talked about a lot of people who have touched my life, this isn't about me. This is about the awesome goal of justice, which in our society has been entrusted to the judicial branch. Because the Colorado Supreme Court is the highest court in the Colorado judicial branch, I am keenly mindful of the critical importance of its work. As a justice on the court, I promise you that I will sacrifice, suffer, and struggle every day in the pursuit of justice. I promise you that I will seek justice with tireless exertion and passionate concern. And I promise you that I will do my utmost to make you and the rest of Colorado proud. I will not let you down. Thank you, and may God bless you all. That was only the first half of my speech.
Well, before we hear the second half, I think I should. Since nothing more clearly need be said, I'll just thank you all for coming and say that concludes our ceremony. I've been asked to make an announcement, though, that Justice Samour will receive friends and well-wishers at a reception in the atrium on the first floor, and you are all welcome. If the clerk of the court will announce a recess, the court will be in recess until further notice.
All right. Court is adjourned.